So I'm not exactly sure how long this video is going to be. You know, it all sort of depends on how I'm sort of feeling on this topic. You know, it's very possible that this ends up as one of those really long 30-minute videos or something, which is not really what I'm hoping for because that's a lot of editing and whatnot. But or hell, like it could just end up being like a minute and a half long or something. I don't really know. It all sort of depends. Let's see, how exactly do I start this? Okay, how about this? So you know how there's like the three greatest questions, you know, that humanity has been asking since like the dawn of time, right? There's who are we, where do we come from, and where are we going, right? You know, these are like the three main questions that have kept people like up at night, like thinking about it. Like it's like the questions that like scientists have been asking themselves for thousands of years and whatnot. But there's a question that has bothered me for like years. And what's funny is it actually bothers me like so much to the point where like I bring it up sometimes with like my friends and like my dad. And anytime I bring it up, or because I bring it up like pretty frequently every now and then, they just sort of go like, oh god, like here we go again. Because it's like probably so annoying to hear me talk about it. So, you know, screw it. I'm gonna talk about it now anyway. So the question that's bothered me for a while is it's basically the discovery of fire. And the thing that bothers me is it's not like when I'm talking about the discovery of fire, I'm not talking about like how it was created and whatnot, you know? Because obviously like that's not like the thing that really bothers me, because those are already questions that have already sort of been answered and stuff, right? Well, for the most part. Like scientists have sort of discovered a lot of what needs to be discovered for that sort of conversation. We found like tools and stuff in caves that cavemen use in order to create fire, you know, like hundreds of thousands of years ago and whatnot. But like that's not the question I'm after. I'm not really after like how it was created. Well, actually, now that I think about it, I guess that is sort of the question I'm after. It's just sort of worded a little differently, or at least it's just worded a little differently in my head. Because the question I'm after is not so much as like, it's not like the tool aspect and like what they use. It's more of like who created it and like their mindset on how they decided that they wanted to try to create it, you know? Like, does that make any sense? Like, for instance, imagine you're a caveman, right? You know, like you're sitting in your cave. For the last 30 years, every day of your life has consisted of waking up, going out, and trying not to die. You know, you've managed to figure out how to make a sharp stick. You've stabbed a couple animals with it in order to make food. You've picked some like orange and red berry looking things off trees and decided to eat them, which is a whole other topic on how I don't even understand how they decided to do that and put things in their mouth. But anyway, you're a caveman, right? Now, your first interaction with fire probably wasn't like intentional, right? Like it wasn't like you just sitting over like a campfire with a stick and just spinning it over and over and over again until smoke came out. Like you didn't know how, you know, like you didn't know what fire was. You had never seen fire. You didn't know what you could do with fire. Basically, like you just didn't know what fire was, right? Because up until this point in your life, you didn't even know it existed. Which begs me to believe that like your first interaction with fire, since it was probably caused by like a phenomenon of nature, you know, like lightning or something, or some dried brush catching on fire and heat, that your first interaction with fire probably wasn't a very good one, right? In fact, it was probably you physically running away as fast as you can away from this terrifying thing that you've never seen before. So it's like after you've had that interaction with fire that's all terrifying and whatnot, at what point are you gonna be like, I'm gonna try to recreate that thing, you know? Like, why would, in what universe would you try to do? You know, when you're like a kid and you touch like something hot, you're like, oh, I'm not gonna do that anymore, right? Like you learn from it. You're just like, I'm just not going to do that. You know, like, wouldn't you be terrified of fire from that point on? Like, why would you try to recreate it? Like, here's the example in my head of like how that first interaction probably went with fire. Like, you were probably sitting in the mud of your cave, right? Playing tic-tac-toe on the wall of your cave with a rock. And then like out of nowhere you start hearing like this weird like crackling sound outside your cave. It starts getting like a little weird like glow coming from the side of it. And you being a caveman, at nighttime you haven't really seen like light other than stuff coming from the moon, or maybe like, I don't know what, some fireflies or something. What else gives off light? Anyway, so you see this like glowing coming from the entrance of your cave, right? So you're like, okay, like that's weird. So you know, you like drop your rock that you're playing tic-tac-toe with, you walk over to the entrance, and then you look out the entrance of your cave and you just see all your wildlife friends, all the forest animals that you made friends with over the years, just sprinting away from this orange, glowy, flamey thing. How would you describe flames? I don't, whatever. Anyway, you know, and it's coming right at you. You know, from like your perspective, it's just like this wall of bright orange sporadic movement that's sort of coming at you, getting closer, and like the closer it gets, it's like sort of you're feeling like this heat, you know? And just for the sake of like argument, let's just say that the caveman was maybe a little bit braver, or maybe he's like extra curious that day. So he decides to get a little close to the fire instead of running away from it like all his forest friends, which in my mind wouldn't make a whole lot of sense, because if you see your forest friends running away from this thing, I'd probably do the same thing, you know? Anyway, so let's say he gets closer to it. The closer he's getting to it, as it's also moving closer, he's probably feeling the heat get a little bit more intense, right? And it's starting to maybe hurt a little bit. At which point, I'm just going to assume that's when the caveman decided to just run away, right? Like that, I think that's the final straw. You sort of figure things out. You're a caveman. You have a brain. It's not fully developed like it is today, but like you know, you can learn from things, right? So like, with that being said, why would you ever try to recreate something after you had that first experience with it, you know? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Oh god. Anyway, I don't know. It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me on like why you would try to recreate something, or like try to harness it after you've had such a terrifying experience of it the first time, you know? And one of the things that bothers me most about this question is like, I haven't seen really any articles, you know, like about this in general. You know, like the articles are always about like what tools cavemen use, or that like it sort of connects the whole like the articles say something like, oh, like we think like their first interaction with fire was, I don't know, like X amount of years ago, and then it says something like, and eventually they discovered fire or something. Like, they never sort of connect the dots on how it possibly came to be that way, though. It's just sort of like, here's what they think happened, and then here's eventually how they discovered it. It's just sort of like this bland timeline that has this huge blank spot in the middle, which they don't answer my question of just like, how did a caveman figure that shit out? You know what I'm talking, you know what I mean? Like, hold on, let me just like look this up real quick. Eventually it says that wildfires occurred sporadically. So like the next step in humanity's like whatever relationship with fire would be to try to try to like preserve it, right? And then after that, it just says, and eventually humans figured out how to create it. But the part that drives me crazy is that there's no like connecting. It just says their next step is to try to preserve it. And then they just make a new paragraph and say that eventually humans learned how to preserve it. This is like every article I've ever come across on this topic. They just sort of skip ahead and are just like, yep, and eventually they figured it out. Which is like, it drives me crazy, man. Like, you want to know what I think? So I've been watching a lot of Ancient Aliens a lot recently, right? Oh boy, already starting off strong with this whole idea. So I don't know if you've ever seen Ancient Aliens, but basically it's just a bunch of guys who theorize that mankind has had help from extraterrestrials, you know, with helping us create things with technology that like mankind couldn't have possibly thought of creating at the time, right? You know, and they go into a bunch of different locations and stuff where there's like, you know, like how did the Egyptians create the pyramids, and moving all these rocks and carving things with the technology they had back then. It just like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, which to be fair, like it you know, it's a little questionable. Anyway, the point is, I just wonder if maybe there's like some ancient alien stuff going on with the discovery of fire. You know, is it possible that maybe some like alien came down in a spaceship and then walked up to a caveman and was like, hey, by the way, if you get this flint rock and you rub it against another rock and the spark will come out, and you put it over some tinder and then you start breathing on it? Has to be aliens, that's all I'm saying. You know, like, it's either aliens helped cavemen figure that kind of crap out, or like we are not giving cavemen enough credit for how smart they were back then. You know, because like with any show or commercial that you see on TV, like they always depict cavemen as these like total and complete morons, right? But it's like, could they have really been that stupid if they figured out how to create fire? Like, I wouldn't have thought of that. You know, we're always depicting cavemen as these like complete idiots in loincloths, just, you know, like making like like stupid noises, but like in reality we're probably geniuses wearing lab coats with like beakers and stuff everywhere. Okay, maybe that's a little too far, but like, you get my point, right? I don't know. I don't have any answers once again. This is the part of the conversation I always get to by myself. It's just like, I can never, I have no answers. I just sort of wish I knew how that story went down. Like, who created fire, man? Like, how did you possibly, you know, like, not like preserving and taking it from like a fire that nature had already created, but like, who was the guy that was like, okay, so in order to create fire, right, we gotta do this specific task. We gotta make friction. I don't know. Like, that's just such a crazy thought to me. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I don't really know where else to go from this. That's just sort of where I always end up. So wow, this video was a total and complete waste of time.